I'm here to listen. Why am I walking on this way?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Muse's AT Podcast, where you can relive my epic journey with me. This is Muse, and what follows is my Appalachian Trail story. Today's episode covers Tuesday, June 10th, 2025. We're now relatively deep into the 100-mile wilderness, well on our way to our food drop. Last episode's entry mentioned that we rescheduled our food drop from what was originally planned this day, the 10th, out to the 12th. We've only touched briefly on what this food drop was all about, so we'll go a little deeper there today. And because of another thing that I want to do in this episode's commentary section, the haiku today is going to be one that I wrote at Trail Days. So this haiku is written May 16th, 2026. Trail after the trail. Remember all the good times. The miles and the friends. All right, folks, we have a lot of things to add into our trail glossary today. I actually count 10 entries that we're going to add in there, so I'm going to try and hit them pretty quick. The first one is the half-gallon challenge. That actually comes up in today's episode. The half-gallon challenge is something that occurs in a place called Pine Grove Furnace in Pennsylvania. It is the geographical midpoint of the Appalachian Trail, and so to commemorate being halfway, regardless of which direction you're going, you do the half-gallon challenge, which is you eat a half gallon of ice cream in one sitting. And there can be quite a social experience about this. Trail families would do this together and see who maybe even finishes the ice cream first, that sort of thing. It's one of those fun trail traditions. The second one is the term lash or lasher. Now, I am trying to keep a clean podcast, but I don't think this word's too bad. A lash stands for a long-ass section hike. So basically, a lasher is anybody out there who is doing a portion of the trail, but they're actually doing a significant part of the trail. I had mentioned, for instance, in my own trail family, Foggy Froggy and Silly Putty, who did like from New York all the way down into Virginia in 2024. That would have been defined as a lash. You'll also hear about blue blazes and yellow blazes. Let me start with what exactly a blaze is in the first place. A blaze is just a marker that marks a trail. Along many trails here locally in North Carolina, that'll be some sort of a placard that is nailed to a tree, something like that. Along the Appalachian Trail, and I believe this is pretty standard along the longer trails, but I'll let any of you out there correct me on that. It is simply a vertical paint stripe that is blazed in white. You hear in this episode about blue blazes and yellow blazes. Blue blaze is any sort of supporting trail. And sometimes you can talk about a blue blazer as somebody who might skip a section of the Appalachian Trail to go along one of these supporting trails that might connect up with the Appalachian Trail later on. A yellow blaze or a yellow blazer is somebody who walks a road instead of the trail and just connects up with the trail again a little bit later. A flip-flop or a flip-flopper. What a flip-flop is it is a through hike because a flip-flop hiker is hiking the entirety of the trail, but for scheduling reasons or whatever logistics or just preference, they are starting somewhere in the middle of the trail, going to one of the ends, and then maybe going to the next end and going back to the middle. Or you could even start at an end, go to a point in the middle, and then start at the other end and go back to that point. The salient point on a flip-flop is that you started in one direction and you finished in the other direction. A term that comes up that probably should have been defined previously, because you've heard it before, is tent city. Now, tent city, you can hear this in a general sense along the trail sometimes when there's just a bunch of tents camping together. In particular, this tent city we're talking about is the one at Trail Days in Damascus. If you've looked at the photos that I put out there on Instagram, you can see it's just a city of tents. It's just everybody congregating in that place, and you just see hundreds of tents. Another new one that comes up in this episode is the Long Trail. The Long Trail is one of the oldest long-distance continuing hiking trails in the United States. It is 272 miles following the main ridge of the Green Mountains, running straight through the spine of Vermont from the Massachusetts border all the way up to the Canadian border. It was in many ways a precursor to the AT. The Long Trail had its birth in 1909, conceived by a gentleman by the name of James P. Taylor, and it was in large part the Long Trail that served as the inspiration for Benton Mackay when he envisioned the Appalachian Trail. And the Long Trail and the AT intersect. For the 105 southernmost miles of the Long Trail, you are actually traveling on the AT as well, before, if you were going northbound, the AT heads really eastward, trail north is east towards New Hampshire, while the long trail continues truly north towards Canada. And then a couple more place names I will mention pretty late in the episode: Skyline Drive and Shenandoah. First of all, Shenandoah National Park is in northern Virginia. Just to kind of place it, it is a very long, skinny corridor of a park. You actually hike through Shenandoah National Park for about 100 miles. Actually, it's 101 miles. And the main road going really parallel to the trail, although both of them snake, of course, but the main road going through Shenandoah National Park down that same corridor is Skyline Drive. And Skyline Drive is really the beginning or the end, depending, I suppose, on which direction you're going, of the Blue Ridge Parkway. Skyline Drive being really what the parkway is called within Shenandoah National Park. June 10th, 2025. Cold, wet day. Start, Wadley Stream Lean-To. End, Potawajo Spring Lean-To. Miles, 10.1. We awoke to quite a chill, having noticed a drop in the temperature even before we all headed to our tents or hammocks. Haley got to spread out in the shelter. She had the whole thing to herself. After last night, though, I think Haley also has pretty much decided she prefers her hammock. I don't think she slept too well. In camp with us once again were Dan, Michaela, and Fernando. One nice side benefit of the cold was that the bugs seemed to go away entirely. I guess they are sitting in front of their little fireplaces or something. Another thing was the awesome mist that came over the lake, which made for a pretty cool sight. So far, we were just cold, not yet wet. That came later. The knee feels pretty good today, though I could feel some slight swelling throughout. I think hiking decreases that though, as in the morning I think it was visible, but later was not. I asked Haley about her ankle and she said it was fine. Our energy was a bit low, and we were super slow in the morning. The first shelter, Namakanta Stream Lean-To, was 5.8 miles away. It was 2 p.m. by the time we got there, and we considered just stopping early for the night, but we took a longer break, ate, and hydrated. With our food drop on Thursday, it made things a lot easier if we made it to Potawajo tonight, another 4.3 miles out. It's crazy what a little rest, hydration, and food will do. We got there in 2 hours. Tomorrow we'll have 11.4 to set us up well for an easy morning hike on Thursday for food drop. That is one thing about food drop. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't do it without it, not unless I was a much more experienced and stronger hiker. I wouldn't want to carry all of our food for the 100. But it does put us on a schedule. Just yesterday, we had to hit a certain point to communicate with them, and now our logistics center on getting there. Not a big thing, but kind of looking forward to being completely on our own time. We seem to have a lot of food, so I'm thinking we can get the rest of the way to Munson at whatever pace we like. One final thought for today, a thank you to my neighbor Mark. He sent us off with some notes that I knew would come in handy. Mark, I've got that paper in my pack. Along the 5.8 to Namakanta, I realized I wanted a mindset adjustment. I wasn't really in a negative place per se, but just kind of, I want to get there already. Remembering those notes, I slowed down for a few steps. Yeah, even slower, smiley face. Took a couple of deep breaths and committed to simply noticing everything. Every fern, trunk, leaf, and even rock. Man, it's beautiful out here. Which makes me think of something else. So final thought for real this time. It is just amazing that this is happening, that this is my life right now. Simply taking the next step and taking in the next view is literally my job, and even my duty as husband and more directly father. That's just otherworldly, and something for which I am extremely grateful. All right, we're going to take a quick break to hear from the sponsors who help keep Muse's AT podcast on the trail. These are offerings that truly enhanced my thru-hike experience, so I'd really like you to check them out. Please look for and follow the links in the show notes to this episode. Looking forward to that lazy day on the couch, knocking down your Netflix queue and wondering what to wear? Quick answer, wear something else. Summit Ready Apparel is clothing built for those who scramble over jagged rocks, reach the peaks, and actually enjoy getting caught in a torrential downpour. If you're someone who doesn't mind the elements and has the grit to crush the next segment anyway, look no further than Summit Ready to match your restless trail spirit. Check out the catalog at summitreadyapparel.com and get ready for your next adventure. That's summitreadyapparel.com. Looking for your next great trail read? Walk Uphill is a powerful story about leaving the emptiness of modern corporate life behind and finding a completely new beginning on the Appalachian Trail. It's about discovering what life can look like when you embrace freedom, lighten your load, and take it step by relentless step. I actually read this book myself during a couple rest days in Gorham, New Hampshire, right after conquering the brutal terrain of southern Maine. I literally couldn't put it down. I read it from cover to cover in 2 days. The book chronicles the real-life events of the author, Bounce the Hiker, in a twisty, shocking, edge-of-your-seat story that even the most imaginative fiction writer couldn't make up. Just a quick content warning, there is definitely adult material in this book, so I wouldn't recommend buying it for your 10-year-old's birthday. But if you're looking for a gripping, raw trail adventure, I highly recommend Walk Uphill by Bounce the Hiker. You can find it easily on Amazon by searching Walk Uphill Book, or just click the direct link in the show notes of this episode. All right, as we come to the commentary section, I do have an intent to talk about Food Drop, to talk about the mechanics of Food Drop and what that kind of really was, kind of flesh that out a little bit. We talked a little bit about it earlier on, but I really didn't paint the picture. And then while we're on the topic of Food Drop, it might be a good idea to talk about food, because I really haven't talked about what we were eating on trail at all. But before we even go there, and this might even push it to where we're getting low on time and I save those topics until a later episode, I really want to, because this is exciting to me, read some mail. The podcast has gotten some mail. The mail is from Duncan, who we met at Trail Days. Now, as a reminder, because I've been introducing you to a lot of people, Duncan was on trail last year going northbound. He wrote daily as well on trail journals and had previously read my trail journal. He and I would have passed by each other at some point on the hike. I'm interested and excited to dive into his trail journal and figure out when that was. A couple of nuts and bolts regarding mail. First, if you want to get in touch, and I hope you do, the methods are either museatpodcast@gmail.com, a guest book entry on the trail journal, or a DM on Instagram at Muse Hikes. Secondly, I want to let you know that before I arranged to read Duncan's email, I asked his permission first. What I don't want to do is for you to think that just because you get in touch with me, that's automatically going on the air. You might just want to connect. And I want to encourage that because I'd love to hear from you. Last housekeeping item here is to mention that when this airs on June 8th, it will have been almost a month since I received Duncan's email. I just want to give you a heads up that that's how that will likely always work. I need to record ahead, and I also need to find the right timing to drop it in. So if we talk and I say I want to put your mail on the air and get your permission, please don't be upset if it takes a while before you hear it. Before we get into it, I want to mention why I wanted to broadcast Duncan's emails. As you'll hear, Duncan, after we met at Trail Days, became a regular listener, and as a thru hiker himself, thought of certain things when he heard certain episodes. For one, I'm super grateful and excited that he took the time to share those impressions with me. But also, I thought it would be great for you to hear these words of, again, a different thru hiker sharing his experiences that relate with some of the things that I've shared. I hope you enjoy this. And I'd like to do it again. I mean, even right here in the commentary of an episode, the simple fact is that I am going to run out of things to talk about. Eventually, we'll get to a point on the trail where today was really a lot like yesterday. And as I say that, I don't want you to hear that as a negative thing, because it's actually one of the major positives of the trail. It was actually Ratatouille in one of our recent Slow-Mo Discord calls, which I said were on Zoom before. That was my mistake. I misspoke. We actually do that over Discord. But Ratatouille was saying that's one of the beauties of the trail. You're completely focused on one goal. So you don't have all these distractions and all these different objectives that you have in regular life. There's a simplicity to that is really what all of us as hikers are out there looking for. So when I say that today was really a lot like yesterday, that's actually largely a positive thing. But it could hamper us a little bit on creating content. I do plan on managing that. As I said in episode 1, we can stack entries together and therefore just even get to the finish line just that much faster. And that would be just fine. But what a cool other option to have this different point of view come in through our mailbox. And that can be a pass-through hiker sharing their experience like Duncan is here. It could be a complete novice or somebody who's not even a hiker but just enjoys the podcast asking a question or asking to elaborate some point will kind of bring that different viewpoint. So that's just another option that we have, and something that I'd love to do, especially if I were to find out that you particularly like this. Which, that's another thing you can drop in those communication channels, right? Is just the feedback. Let me know what you're liking and what you're not liking. And as I mentioned, Duncan's emails excited me. So here goes. This was written on May 20th. Hey Muse, I have a similar story as in episode 8 where you mentioned that you thought you hadn't met Metronome only to discover that it was Dan. In Georgia, on day 2, I briefly met Eli on the trail. He and another hiker, Caleb, seemed like fast hikers, so I assumed I wouldn't see him again. I didn't yet understand that's not necessarily how the trail works. I saw Eli 3 months later at the half-gallon challenge in Pine Grove Furnace when he was Spigot, except we didn't recognize each other. We both looked different, of course, and there's no way either of us knew on day 2 that my donut hat would be significant. A couple of months later, at a shelter with Spigot and his tramily, we figured out we started on the same day, but still didn't realize that we had met on day 2. Something like 50 hikers started on our day, so we just chalked that up to that's how the trail is. It wasn't until Munson that Caleb connected the dots for me that Eli equals Spigot. I find it fascinating how you re-meet and don't meet other hikers during a thru hike. Happy trails, Duncan. And I think that's awesome. I mean, just to set a little bit of context there, Duncan was going northbound. He met this guy on day 2 and didn't realize that it was his friend Spigot until Munson. Kind of a funny story. Now, that's the same Munson that we're talking about being about a week in front of us, having started southbound, right? So we're talking about most of his hike this was going on, which is kind of funny. And Duncan brings up some really good points here about how you meet, re-meet, maybe don't meet people that you thought you'd surely meet. And I just think it's cool to flesh that out from another thru hiker's perspective. So thank you, Duncan, for that. Now, after I replied to Duncan, saying, among other things, that I'd like to read this on the air, I got another email from him, and I want to read that. Hey, Muse. Yes, feel free to read my email on air. I just finished listening to episode 10, where you talked about the purist concept. I had a couple interesting interactions on my hike. In Vermont, one lasher I hiked with around in New England was upset about blue/yellow blazers potentially claiming thru hiker at the end. She wasn't trying to influence me, but we talked through it. And she was also uncomfortable with other hikers getting the impression that she was a thru hiker since she was, quotes, just a lasher. I told her when we're briefly meeting day/weekend hikers on the trail, it's just easier for us to say we're thru hikers. Also in Vermont, I was sitting at a trailhead when a hiker I knew asked me if I was still a purist. I said yes, and he replied, good, stay that way. I took it to mean he regretted the blue/yellow blazing he had done with his tramily. I had been at the shelter with all of them the previous evening/that morning, and I knew that he was the designated blue blaze mapper that day. I really wanted to follow up on his comment, but his tramily appeared at the trailhead. In New Hampshire, a flip-flop hiker my lasher friend and I had met a few times made a not-so-complimentary comment about, quotes, those purists. We changed the subject. We later wondered when/how purist became a semi-derogatory term. I guess if you're defensive about yellow blazing, make the non-yellow blazers sound like the weirdos is the play? I'll admit it bothered me after a hard hiking day when a hiker you were ahead of is already at a shelter, or more likely at a deli/hostel. But overall, I think I'm ambivalent to the purist, quotes, issue. Hikers that I saw at least a handful of times were pretty upfront about blue/yellow blazing, so it's hard to really be upset about it when you're hanging out. Anyway, I also haven't hiked since my thru hike. In fact, setting up my tent in Tent City was my first use of my tent, etc., since Baxter. I don't have any hiking plans, and I'm not tempted by the PCT and CDT. I'm 56, and since I don't have any health issues, I'm interested in something like the Long Trail. I didn't have any hiking experience prior to the AT, so I'd hate to think I'm done, so I'll figure something out. Happy trails, Duncan. And Duncan, thank you for all of that. I'm kind of with you. You know, why make it sound like anybody's doing anything wrong out there? I think that's the concept of hike your own hike all over again. If somebody's way of enjoying this involves some yellow blazing and some blue blazing, go ahead and do it. I will admit that I did some yellow blazing. It wasn't much. I think if I had done a whole lot, it would have not felt real to me. But still, that doesn't mean that I'm going to go looking down on somebody who, I don't know, enjoyed Skyline Drive in Shenandoah better than they enjoyed the trail. So they went ahead and yellow blazed, technically, 100 miles. If that's what made the experience the best for them, then great. But I do understand the point about, you're having a hard hiking day and somebody who, should be, quote unquote, behind you, already beating you to the hostel and everything. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to bother you, at least for a second there. But in general, yeah, I'm with you. Hike your own hike. There's no reason for these purists to judge the non-purists. There's certainly no reason for the non-purists to judge the purists. It doesn't make any sense. I also love what you say about setting up your tent in 10 cities at trail days being the first time you used it since your thru hike. Same. It was my first time as well. And in fact, I will go ahead and share with the audience that I packed so poorly that at trail days, you guys heard I went to the outfitter. Well, I went to the outfitter because I needed a hat and a hoodie because I didn't even pack any cold weather stuff. And as you know, Duncan, because you were there with me, but as a lot of people know, that it got pretty chilly that weekend in Damascus, Virginia. And to not have any cold weather gear, like what kind of a thru hiker doesn't even think about that? Now, I will say in my defense, that morning, I had recorded the episode where we were talking about the deaths on Katahdin. And that one always does kind of get to me. And so my brain wasn't quite working because of the emotional impact of even just recording that episode had on me. But either way, yeah, I was out of practice. And then future hiking plans, I'm with you, just still figuring it out. You said you're 56, I'm 48. I'm right there with you. And I don't want to be done. At the same time, I don't know if or when another long through hike really fits into the equation for me. So yeah, that was awesome. Thank you again, Duncan, for mailing in. And folks, yeah, please send the podcast some mail. Even if you don't have as much background to speak from or whatever, and even if you don't want to be on the air, that's fine. I would love to hear from you and see how what I'm putting out there is landing with you guys. And with that, based on what I think the time is, it's always a little hard for me to see it when I'm recording, but let's talk a little bit about the food drop specifically, and then we'll probably leave the topic of nutrition in general and what we were eating to a future episode. So food drop, how did this work? First of all, it was one of the benefits that we bought with the Super Sobo special there at the AT Hostel. And what they did was during our workshop, they gave you a bucket. And our job was to fill that bucket with whatever we needed at the food drop, because the rest of it's all going into our pack. Food drop was roughly 45 miles in, and they would essentially replenish our food with food that we left with them in this bucket. And that's how it went down. We'll talk about the food drop day in a couple of episodes, but Trash Panda, Loins of Arabia, brought us all our buckets, and that was cool. Now, the other thing about this, though, is that planning it all out was kind of a big endeavor. I remember the workshop started at 3. It wasn't that terribly long. It might have ended at 5, maybe it ended at 5:30, something like that. I mean, they told us a lot of stuff, but, 2.5 hours of content's really kind of enough. So back on that day, back on June 3rd, it would have been a week ago trail time from the one that we're on June 10th. We finished up the workshop, and then we hung out for a little bit, but it wasn't too much after the workshop that Tripp offered to bring us to the grocery store. We're walking around the grocery store. We're trying to figure out what we want and trying to utilize all the information that we just got in the workshop around what nutrition we should be doing and everything. We get all of our groceries, and I actually remember, and this is June in Maine, it didn't get dark until late, but Haley and I were up well past dark, just sorting our food, deciding what went in the bucket, what went in our packs, what went in her pack, what went in my pack. I do remember that in addition to the food, I stuck at least 1 fuel canister in there. Was it maybe 2? I don't think it was 2. And we did run out of fuel in the 100-mile wilderness. So we'll talk about that a little bit as it comes up. And as I mentioned, next episode, I see a good opportunity to kind of round out this idea of nutrition and what we were eating. Last thought this episode, I said we got wet. I didn't even know what wet was yet. Now, in general, I was very lucky around the rain and storms. We'll get to that topic later on as well. Maybe when I really get wet. For now, we're just continuing in the 100. Talk to you next time. Until then, this has been Muse. Please do send me an email whether or not you'd like me to read that on the air, because I'd love to hear from you. And thank you for walking with me, and happy trails.